So you have to know what you want, and then you have to know what you should want. Then you have to get your family on board or your friends so that you've got a bit of a community around you. And then you have to think strategically. For all of those of you who are in the crowd right now who have some things to say that you need to say but aren't saying them, then you have to ask yourself very, 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 very seriously, what is it about my life that has left me so exposed that I do not dare to say what I need to say? And that's a scary question. It's an admission of vulnerability. It can be an admission of failure as well. And then you have to think through very carefully what you need to do to fortify yourself so that you can regain control of your tongue. And you might say, well, why should I do that? And the answer is, do you want your thoughts to die or do you want to die? And that's the answer. It's morally required of each of us that we live in a manner that enables us to retain control of our word. Right. Do you have something to say that you're not saying? If you do, then it's your fault. This is your fault. It's your problem. And you might say, well, I'm too afraid to talk. It's like, fair enough. How afraid are you not to talk? People say to me frequently, they compliment me on my bravery. And I think, you don't understand. I'm not brave. I don't like conflict. I'm way more afraid of losing control of my tongue than I am of the consequences of saying what I have to say. Because I know what happens when we allow other people to control our tongues. It's not good. What a woman needs is someone who's disagreeable enough to keep the psychopaths away and the criminals, but agreeable enough to share and be reasonable. You want a man who, it's tough. It also depends to some degree on the dangerousness of the environment, right? So the more dangerous the environment, maybe the more disagreeable a man you need. So it's a really thin needle for women to thread. And that's basically the Beauty and the Beast mythology, right? Because the woman, Beauty in that story, wants a beast. Well, why? To keep the real beasts at bay. And who are the real beasts? Gaston. Well, and what is he? He's a narcissist, right? He's a narcissistic. He borders on psychopathy. Very dangerous. Very dangerous. Arrogant, egotistical, self-centered. And he's a parody of masculinity in some sense. And so Beauty wants the beast because he's a beast and he can keep Gaston at bay. But he's tameable. You look at the world through a goal-directed framework. And so when you switch your goals, what appears to you in the world switches. It's mystical in a sense, but in another sense, it's just understandable. It's like, well, if I look that way, I see the TV and the couch, and if I look this way, I see you in the chair. But what I've done is I've changed the reality that manifests itself to me just by changing the direction of my orientation. Well, we do that metaphysically as well. If you decide that you're going to be courageously trusting towards people when they offer you an opportunity, even though you're skeptical and timid, but you decide, no, I'm going to have some faith in people, so I'm going to be courageous and trusting, then when they open a door to you that's an opportunity, you'll think, oh, that's a door I could walk through, instead of thinking I'm moving into a trap. And it's the same reality in some sense, but the way that you're interacting with it changes. Well, it can change. It can invert. It can change so radically that it barely looks like you're living in the same world. I do believe that it's morally incumbent upon us to do good, regardless, let's say, of the degree to which we're persecuted or insulted or tortured or hurt, is that none of that, no matter how intense it becomes, no matter how justified, I've talked to people in my clinical practice and my private life who were terribly tortured when they were children, for example. They have brutal histories, and you'd think, man, if that person did something evil, you'd think, well, how could you avoid it? And yet I've seen people come out of that who've refused to do evil despite all that, and then you're sort of starstruck with amazement at their moral fortitude, but it's the decision to hold axiomatically the proposition that being itself is good, and you're morally obliged to participate in that goodness regardless of the circumstances, both sociological and psychological. The dark tetrad interested me particularly because the literature I read on psychopaths did describe them as impulsive, so they're willing even to sacrifice their own futures to the pleasure of the moment. But there was obviously a subset of psychopaths who delighted in being cruel, and the standard explanation of callousness, say, which is merely lack of empathy, didn't seem to be enough, right? Because it isn't merely that people are lacking empathy. It's that sometimes there are people who take a positive delight in cruelty, and that mobbing behavior or bullying behavior, troll behavior, which is lulls, right? I just did it for the lulls, which is the plural of LOL, laugh out loud. And to do it for the lulls is to go after someone on the net, often anonymously, merely for the purpose of making them miserable and wretched and put them in pain, just so that you can enjoy that. If someone's been in shape once in their life, they age way better. You know, you hear about those exercises that you can do online to make you smarter and keep your cognitive ability intact. Yep. Those don't work. There's no evidence that they work. People keep saying that they make you smarter, they maintain your cognitive function. Psychologists have studied that for 50 years, hoping that one of those things will work. Trying all sorts of creative tacks, they don't work. Exercise works. Cardiovascular and weightlifting. You start to decline in your fluid intelligence at about the age of 25, and it's a linear trend downhill, and it can accelerate as you get old. Quite ugly. If you exercise, you stave that off. We were walking down the street, and this car pulled up beside us, and this kid hopped out. This good-looking Latino kid, 20, 21, something like that. He jumped over, and he said, he's all excited. He said, "Are you Dr. Peterson?" I said, yeah. He said, "I'm really, really happy to meet you. I've been watching your lectures for like a year and a half, and I've been trying to put my life together, and it's really working. I'm really doing way better. I really wanted to thank you." And so it's lovely, when you're walking down a kind of rough area, and somebody pulls up beside you and they jump out of the car to tell you how much better their life is. That's a pretty good morning. And so, but then that isn't all that happened. He ran back to his car. He said, wait a minute. He went back to his car and he got out his dad, and they came over together, and his dad was just smiling away, like a real smile, you know. And so was the kid, and they had their arms around each other, and they said, "Look, like we've really been working on our relationship for the last year and a half, and it's going just great. And we want to thank you." And the father said something like, "I'm really happy that you got my son back to me." It's like, yes. Here, we'll do a little bit of arithmetic. So, a while back, Disney executive mentioned on video, she said, "Well, I have 2 children, 5 and 7. One is trans and the other is pansexual." And I just thought mathematically right away, it's like the chance you have a trans kid is 1 in 3,000. That's not a very high chance. And let's say the chance that you have a pansexual kid is the same, whatever pansexual means. But whatever that is rarer than trans, because no one ever even heard about it until 5 years ago. So the joint probability that you have a trans kid and a pansexual kid is 1 in 9 million. The odds that you're a pathological narcissist sacrificing your own children to the glorification of your compassion is 8,999,999 to 1. So like, do you have a trans kid and a pansexual kid? Or are you a devouring mother? Well, you can look at the odds and decide for yourself. Why can't men find women to date? That's not your problem. Your problem is why you can't find the woman you want. Yeah. And you have to assume that's your problem, because otherwise you have to assume that it's the women's problem. And really? They're all wrong and you're right. Really? Lucky you. Maybe you are. You're an undiscovered gem of some sort. Probably not.
What would you say are things that men need to be focusing in on when it's trying to select a woman for a long-term marriage partner?
Well, you want someone honest. That's really, really important. Someone who will do her best to tell the truth. And my wife swore she'd do that before we got married, and she has. Probably better than I have. And so that's a rock, man, at the bottom of things, you know. One of the things I've understood more deeply recently, more explicitly, you know, I've been putting this together, is that the definition of sanity that's generally implicitly held among the psychological community is probably too individualistic. And what I mean by that is that I don't think that sanity is something that you have in your head. It's not part of your psyche. It's not part of you exactly. It's more like harmonious interaction with the hierarchy of social arrangements that you have with other people. You're saying if you have a relationship that's working, if you have a relationship with your family that's working, if that family is nested inside a community that isn't too fractious, you know, there's something musical about it. It's like every note
Yeah.
has its place. Imagine that we had jointly strategized so that you were aiming at something. Maybe you're unemployed and you're aiming at getting your CV together to get a job. So the ideal is for you to be fully employed, and now you've even bought into that ideal. So it's an ideal that you're willing to accept as an orienting structure. And then you find that you don't do it, and you come back the next week to therapy and you say, I'm so ashamed, I was supposed to submit my CV to like 10 potential employers this week, and I did nothing at all. And so the first thing you do in that situation is you say, well, we should lower the goalposts. We should lower the goal. We say, well, you couldn't submit your CV to 10 employers. Could you even open it on your computer? Because people are often afraid to even do that because, your CV contains, well, maybe the record of your successes, but also the record of your failures. And so you scale down the goal until it no longer has that face of the harsh judge that will destroy. It's such a strange phenomenon. It's like the square root of the number of people operating in a specific discipline produce half the output. That's the law. And so if there's 1,000 scientists working on in a discipline, 30 of them publish half the papers. And you can look across, it's the same with basketball, hoops successfully managed, hockey goals scored, soccer goals scored, records produced, books written, books sold, records sold. It's like everywhere, this law, this weird square root law. Sometimes people sum that up as the 80-20 principle, but it's way
that's
worse.
The way I heard it.
Yeah, it's way worse than that.
Yeah, it's way worse than 80-20.
Yeah, well, it implies, for example, if you have an organization with 10,000 people, 100 of them doing half the work.
Yeah.
Now, if you have 10, it's 3, and that's not so bad, but at 10,000, it's 100. And you think, no way. It's like, well, if you meet some of those people who might be in that 100, you might think differently. This is useful for people who are trying to embark on an intimate relationship, is you need to talk to your wife about the domestic economy and the practicalities of your life together for about 90 minutes a week. And you need to date at least once a week for that length of time, or maybe twice if you can manage that. And if you don't do that, you will become isolated and lonely, and you'll develop a backlog of communication. And if you don't fix that, you'll end up divorced, and then you'll be fixing it for the rest of your life. We think so our thoughts can die instead of us. Let's say you have a problem. And so you're thinking, well, I have a problem. Should I find a new job? So now you're thinking about that. And then you think, well, here's a bunch of reasons why I should have a new job, should find a new job, and a bunch of reasons why I shouldn't. And then you might think, here's some jobs that I could find, job A, job B. And then you compare and contrast those different ideas. But then you might ask, well, what are you doing when you're comparing and contrasting those ideas? Really what you're doing, technically, is you're setting up motivated sub-personalities in the theater of your imagination, and each of those sub-personalities has a viewpoint and it has an argument, and you let those sub-personalities have a discussion in the theater of your imagination, and you draw your conclusion and then move forward, if you can do that. If you aren't speaking the truth, well, you got to ask yourself, if you're not speaking the truth, who is it that's talking? If you're saying something that you do not believe to be true, it's not you talking. It's something else. It might be the part of you that wants to manipulate the other person into delivering what you think you want from them. Well, what is that spirit of manipulation that you've allowed to possess you? It's not you, because those aren't your words. If you're a manipulator and you use your language falsely, you don't live your own life. You live the life of whatever possesses you when you think it's you manipulating. And so you live the life of the spirit of manipulation. There's no difference between that in some fundamental sense and demonic possession. So if that's what you want, go right ahead. But what you miss is the adventure of your own life. You have no idea what will happen if all you do is say what you think, because you have to let go of everything. Just to do that, you have to assume that there isn't anything better that can happen than what happens if you tell the truth, no matter what happens.